Alright. Welcome to yet another Infinity Kingdom guide. In this one, we are going to have a look at Fighting Will, the Tower of Knowledge passive. Fighting Will, how does it work? What is it like? There has been a few player questions about precisely how to proc this, and that has led me to make this guide. So, in this guide, we're gonna dive into what this passive is. How does it work? What does it do? Is it any good? And more appropriately perhaps, when is it any good? There's been a bit of confusion about how to proc the skills. As such, I have asked Infinity Kingdom employees for the true answer as to how this passive procs. I'm gonna go into more detail on that later, obviously. I've been recommending Fighting Will for builds for quite a while now, but it's very important to understand when you can use this successfully. It's not part of every build I make, and it's not going to be. You can't say that this is a certain tier of passive that always fits your main or always fits your second. It's a situational one that needs to fit with the actual build composition that you are running, and it's very situational like all other passives. So first things first, how does it work? This skill is pretty simple to understand at first glance, but we're gonna make sure that we do understand it before we dive any deeper. The skill reads that every 20% drop in number of soldiers, physical damage will be dealt to all enemies, as well as a chance to root them for 6 seconds. This leads us to sort of 4 different points, 4 different things that we need to be sure that we understand. First of all, there's proccing the skill. Secondly, there's the targeting. Third, the damage type. And fourth, root control effect. So Fighting Will. This is the part where there's been some confusion. I've been asked a couple times by different players, like, does it work this way or does it work that way? And in the end, I asked an employee to clarify. So basically, there are 2 sides to this. There's 2 trains of thought. One is that I've seen players claim that this skill procs once your march hits 20% increment threshold. So once your entire setup reaches, as you can see in the top of your screen when fighting during replays, once that hits a 20% threshold, then the skill would proc. The other side of the argument says, no. Fighting Will procs only on the specific immortal you have it equipped on. When this immortal hits a 20% threshold, then the skill procs. So like, see the image here, we are around 50% HP, something like that. That means that the skill would have procced from this immortal alone. We're imagining that it's on our green immortal here. I think it's Alex. That would have procced on 80% and again on 60%. That would happen even though our entire march is still maybe beyond 80%. Maybe Alex is the only one who's actually been taking any damage whatsoever. We would still have 2 procs at this time. So which side is right? As I said, I asked an employee to clarify and run it past the development teams to confirm. And the truth, or well, at least the answer I got back, is that the second explanation is true. As such, you want to equip this skill on an immortal that does take damage. We don't really care about other immortals' troop counts for this passive, that is, only that of the immortal where Fighting Will is equipped. That does drive me down a tangent, speculating as to how to use this as a control mechanic, combining stuff like lifelink and assist on a frontliner, physical damage frontliner. Maybe you could do that on someone like Peter, for instance, who's not really the best DPS natively, but he could become sort of a hybrid utility tankish damage dealer by having lifelink assist and Fighting Will. I don't know, maybe. I'm gonna try some stuff out based on that. Anyway, that was a side note. I'm getting off track here. Our second point was targeting. It's a quick one, but also an important one. But you want to take note of it, that is quite few control effects that actually hit all enemies at the same time. As such, it's a pretty unique Tower of Knowledge skill that offer your March a quite incredible control, especially against offensive physical damage deals. But more on that later. For point 3, damage type, it's physical damage. It's also quite nice damage. For a control skill, the damage output of this thing is actually surprisingly high, which makes it fit. Well, spoiler alert as to what's coming later, but that does make it fit extraordinarily well into control bursty setups. What you should note is that you of course always want to run this on a solid physical attack immortal with proper physical attack attributes. Fourth and last, we've got the root effect. Right, so root's a control effect. There's a lot of different control effects. What the heck is a root? A root's a control that affects and afflicts the enemy with a negative effect or a debuff called confine. What confine actually does is it prevents a target from attacking. That means normal attacking. The enemy is prevented from completing normal attacks. This does prevent a lot of damage and is extremely annoying, especially for some enemies. But I want to stress that it is a weaker control than that of stuns, for instance, which completely nullify the immortal in the given period, or silences to some degree. Silence is kind of the counter thing, but yeah, it is a weaker control effect. Because of the confined state, your enemy is still able to regain energy and can still cast ultimate skills if they have enough energy to do so. They are only prevented from performing normal attacks. A silence, on the other hand, is kind of the exact opposite. It disables energy regen and ability to cast a skill. However, during a silence, the enemy can still attack. So it's kind of opposite kind of thing we've got here between root confines and silences. While this does make confine and root very powerful against something like maybe you're up against a control vulnerable Alexander or Hannibal, but it is not very powerful against enemies that rely solely on ultimate abilities and energy for damage output. Since that's most immortals, I'll argue that confine is a bit weaker than stuns and silences, but that should not discourage you. It is still a very powerful effect. So how to run this thing right? Alright, we now fully understand what the passive does, how the aspects of it work, how do we then run it right? Is it actually any good, and when is it actually any good? You want to run Fighting Will on setups which 1. has an immortal with high physical attack attributes, and 2. in a setup where you are building for offensive damage pump. Not prolonged defense or setups where you stack control effects. And last bit was not part of the not. You shouldn't use this for prolonged defense, more for an offensive control-y thing, or teams where you actually stack control effects. This is pretty good. It's particularly strong, like I said, against unprotected Alexanders. Maybe you're up against someone who doesn't have the unique effect. You can get some pretty lucky hits in there and massively reduce Alexander's output. Moreover, not everyone runs Fighting Master on Hannibal Barcus and those kinds of immortals, which means that it is quite excellent against a wind march like that relies on auto attacks. It is a pretty good skill for any setup because it does reduce the damage you're taking. It does give you that control effect that you can really use to get ahead of the game. Even immortals like, let's just say, Hippolyta and Wu, they do deal normal attack damage. to varying degrees, but it is always going to be a control effect that saves you some incoming damage. It's just better against some things. I personally prefer using this in combination with other control in a squishy offensive fire setup or in a lightning setup. Relying on control for defense while getting solid damage output is really what Fighting Will is all about, and that pairs it very well with setups focused on maximizing damage output or maximizing control over traditional defenses. Last thing I want to mention is a few noteworthy synergies for this skill. You should take note that the value of Fighting Will goes through the roof if you pair it with the new in brackets, it's not really that new anymore, but it's not every player that has it. The Tower Knowledge skill Stormeye. Stormeye deals a whopping 50% more damage if your target is confined, if it's rooted. This works out quite well, since we usually want to run magical damage in big pumper setup builds, and as such you may even run a dual mage build, with water, lightning, fire. Maybe you're running dual mage setups. You can run dual mage setups for all these elements, or maybe you just got one mage, one physical, but you still rely on magic damage. Then putting in Stormeye and a Fighting Will root effect is excellent. Moreover, in dual mage setup specifically, you are going to run out of magic passives at some point, and root, the blue passive, can actually be swapped in there for quite amazing effect. With if you got Fighting Will, you got root and Stormeye loaded, you can you'll have to get pretty unlucky not to get some extra damage procs from Stormeye. Root by itself is a surprisingly strong passive as well. You should really not underestimate Root. It's an incredible skill that in certain situations can even outshine some of the epic skills. Like, take a look at my Hammurabi here. We're loading Stormeye, and we've got Root on, we've got Fighting Will on one of our front lines. That means that we're really constantly rooting an excellent counter physical setup that also pumps a lot of bonus magic damage from Stormeye. So that was it for this semi-quick guide on review of Fighting Will and how it works. If you have questions about other Tower of Knowledge abilities, about immortal skills and stuff like that, you want to have me run past the employees, please do let me know. I always enjoy learning more about the intricacies and certain mechanics in Infinity Kingdom. Thank you. As always, please do subscribe to the channel. I consistently release new content here on the IK channel and on the official IK Wiki website. Links are in the description. On these channels you can find guides from everything in IK, from events to talents, passives, finished builds and game mechanics. With that, I'm gonna leave you, and as always, thank you for watching and see you for the next one.